All right, well, good evening and welcome to the Act 46 Formal Study Committee on August 31st. And glad to have almost the whole committee here and a number of people in the audience, for which we're thankful. It's been an exciting couple of weeks since we last met. There's been a lot going on. I've tried to keep you abreast a little bit of some of the changes that have kind of come and gone. But a lot of it's revolved around some very healthy conversations with North Bennington and about how we might proceed with them. So I'm going to let Dan talk about that in just a minute. But before we do, I guess we need to approve the minutes of August 10th.
So moved.
If anyone, okay, moved and seconded. Any changes to be offered to them? Hey, Jeff. Welcome.
Richard did it well done. Fantastic job as usual.
All right. It's
Don't
a
put
joy.
that in the minutes.
Put that in the minutes. Richard Bump says it's a joy. Well, we're going to give you some more joy tonight. Hopefully not too much. So all in favor of the minutes of August 10th, say aye. Aye. Okay, so any opposed? Unanimously approved. The next thing on the agenda tonight, we have an update on North Bennington, the various options for a merger vote, which may be a very short action item tonight, discussion item tonight, the discussion of a vote date, any other business that this committee has, which may include how we go forward, and then a brief public comment period. So, Dan, I have a few thoughts about the North Bennington thing, but would you like to lead off, or shall I?
Like to do.
Do you mind if I just? So we've had a lot of conversations with North Bennington, and it was up and down, but they were really helpful and really stayed with the conversations. And we actually had a very productive conversation at the SU the other day. Jim was there, Dan was there. We had Steve Stitzel on the telephone. And we had Matthew Patterson and Ray there also, and from the Prudential Committee. And we really talked it through about what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And I think we came to a better understanding of what they would like to do and what they don't want to have to do, which is to take a stupid vote on something that doesn't pertain to them. And so we came up with a couple of ways forward. And I emailed you all about one of those ways forward, which had to do with creating a single SU, which would mean releasing North Bennington from the Mount Anthony contract. Since that time, we've received an email from Donna Russo-Savage, and I haven't circulated it yet. It's very granular, and it's quite long. But I thought I might just read you the last two paragraphs of it, if that would be helpful. And then we'll let Dan interpret that, because he's the expert. So after a long discussion of whether or not, in the AOE's opinion, North Bennington had to vote, the last two paragraphs of her email say, although the strict reading of Section 17 alone would not permit creation of an MUUSD unless the proposal is warned in North Bennington, it seems incongruous that the legislature would have intended that result. Given the facts of the current situation and also the knowledge that the legislature enacted the MUUSD legislation so that one small district could not prevent its neighbors from moving forward. Accordingly, we believe the better approach would be to read Section 17 together with all the other previous provisions outlined above, which are numerous, so that as to effectuate the legislature's intent. So it's not quite a flat yes. But we're taking this as Dan, correct me if I've got this wrong, but we're taking this as a yes. We can take this vote, and North Bennington doesn't have to vote, and we can still create an MUUSD if the voters decide they'd like us to, and we can still receive the incentives. So, in effect, unless people want to revisit the option that was in my email, we don't need to go there. We don't even need to talk about North Bennington at this point, a vote that would remove North Bennington from the Mount Anthony Compact. We can simply move forward with our MUUSD merger proposal as written, if we would like. And I think what's great about this is that it was really worked out amicably with North Bennington. So we don't need to, they've been helpful in this process. I think they may take a vote, they may not take a vote, but it doesn't matter to us. It's up to them at this point. And really, there's no reason to take a vote. In fact, I would encourage everybody on this committee just to move forward. And I don't think we need to have any conversation about petitions. I don't think we need to have any conversation about forcing them to vote. They don't want to vote. We don't need them to vote. And so I think we're free to move forward on our own if we like. So that's my summary of the North Bennington situation. Dick?
How many boards does that leave us with then? It leaves us with an SU and the MUUSD board, and North Bennington would have its own prudential committee.
3.
And Mount Anthony.
Yeah. Right.
So there's 4 boards.
Yeah.
No, Mount Anthony would be part of the
Mount
new.
Anthony would be us.
So it'd be 3, and I'm not sure, Jim or Dan, if you could speak to
I don't.
how big the SU would
Yeah,
have
I
to
think
be.
it would be a committee that certainly wasn't meeting monthly, and we haven't gone as far as looking at what that new SU would look like, because it would only be made up of North Bennington and the new Mount Anthony Union Unified School District.
MAUSD.
And how membership would be for that, I don't think we even addressed what that new entity would look like.
We just basically wrote a paragraph in the report that said this is probably, if this merger happens, the SU board configuration probably will need to be looked at. The default configuration in the law is based on whether the districts operate schools or not. And if you operate a school under the law, you get 3 representatives to your SU board. If you don't operate schools, you get 1. So under that sort of standard configuration, North Bennington would have 1 representative and Mount Anthony would have 3, which might be fine. On the other hand, if one of the districts votes against the merger, we could end up in a situation where we have Mount Anthony, a standalone district, and North Bennington. Mm-hmm. And that standalone district would get 3 representatives because they operate a school, one of the elementary schools. So in that situation, the SU board might need to be reconfigured because the Mount Anthony board would be significantly larger than the elementary board, yet would have the same number of representatives on the SU board. So it's not something this committee can really deal with. We wrote a paragraph in there to alert the state board that if that happens, it would be up to the SVSU board to petition the state board to create an alternative configuration for the SU board. There's a provision in the law that allows an SU board to petition the state board and to get approval to configure the board some other way.
But as you told me, we can't deal with that right now,
It's
right?
just not within the purview of your authority. Basically the report just highlights that for the voters so they know that's a concern that you thought of. So when the voters, might ask that question, what are the implications, and the implications, if the merger's approved, everyone votes for it, probably no implications, assuming people would be okay with Mount Anthony having 3 and North Bennington having 1. On the other hand, if one of the small elementary districts votes against the merger, and the other 3 move forward, then there is a situation that probably will need some attention. But that's something for the SVSU board ultimately.
Donald?
Yeah, Dan.
In that situation where there is an elementary school, that would not last for very long, because presumably that elementary school will be merged somehow.
Well, it's an open question because the state said a couple times now that, going into 2019, this final plan, if you will, the state currently under the law feels it has, the state board under this master plan that it has authority to create, feels right now it only has authority to merge kind of districts together, what Act 46 calls the least number of districts practicable, whatever practicable means. I love that word. But basically it would mean, districts of similar configuration would be automatically considered to be eligible for merging or forced merger under the plan. In this situation, you wouldn't be able to do that necessarily because you have a modified union school district And theoretically, there's no other partner for that standalone elementary district to merge with. But, who knows what the state, that's what the current law says. I think it's reasonable to expect a lot of change or new laws to be introduced that would address whatever's left over in 2019 in terms of governance structures.
On that point, and before, just John, I'll get you next, how about, but on that point, I also sent out an email from Donna Russo-Savage that talked about the most likely merger configuration. Did people see that? So if, I had been assuming that if we recommended an MUUSD and then we couldn't move forward, that the state might come down and create an MUUSD. But apparently, according to her, the state doesn't have authority to do that. And the MUUSD legislation will have expired by then. So what's most likely is that the state would come down, if the community voted against merging, the state would come down and would merge us with an elementary school district. So we'd have an MAU district, an elementary district. They can't merge, they can't take choice away, so North Bennington would still have a district and would have an SU. So it's most likely that if the state came down and forced a merge, that we would be in a four-board situation, according to the email that we got from her. So if I summarize that correctly, Dan?
Yeah, you'd have an elementary board absent North Bennington, and then Mount Anthony grades 7 through 12, and an SU board.
Right. So not a big improvement over what we have now.
So,
John, yeah.
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Let's go to John, okay.
So, if we do the vote and we have, say, three of the schools go for it, but one doesn't, outside, in addition to North Bennington. So you're saying now that the state board now cannot make that elementary school that's not North Bennington, because we understand why North Bennington wouldn't be, but that one that was part of it, but they voted it down, they can't force that?
Well, that I don't know. If the MUUSD is created, could they?
Yeah, I mean, so you'll have, if you look at the parts that are left over after that process, you have a unified union school district K through 12 that operates schools K through 12. You have an elementary school district that operates a K-6 school and is part of the modified union 7 through 12. And then you have a non-operating elementary district K through 6 who is also part of the Mount Anthony Union School District. So the same reasons why North Bennington can't be forced into Mount Anthony, that operating district can't be forced into a unified district structure either, under the current law. So I think, it's hard to predict what the future holds, but I think the state has said on a couple occasions, not just in this context, that this provision in Act 46 that says the least number of districts practicable, that means the expectation would be under the master plan that those districts that have similar governance structures would be merged together. And those, the ones I just listed off aren't similar.
Right, no, I get
Yeah.
that, yeah, I get
But-
that. I guess my question would be, if we know that now, does it make more sense than because the chances of us having all four, I think we need to weigh whether the chances of us having all four elementary schools vote for it and it pass are high, then I think we should proceed in this way. But if we really feel that the chances of that are low, I mean, we might want to consider the elementary school option, because then if they do get forced to merge, then they'd be forced to merge into the elementary school merge, and then you'd still have four. You'd have a maximum of four in that situation. Does that make any sense to anybody but myself?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I think for process-wise, I mean, to me, it's back to the idea of, sorting out roles and responsibilities, and I would suggest that's something the voters decide. I mean, you've done your work in terms of sort of filling the sheet out and creating the most logical approach, that we knew going into it, this was the most logical approach.
Right.
And I think, it's the only approach that yields incentives. And so you've done that, you've done your due diligence, and if the voters turn it down, or part of them turn it down, then you deal with that. And, work not wasted, those people that voted down are gonna have to submit the self-study plan, so you can, you can at least say we did this process, and you have some narrative that will help you do that.
Okay.
So it's not, that's the way I view the committee's role. It's like you don't have to play God with that stuff, you just sort of you did your job, and the part now is to say, well, how do you want to present it to the voters and let the voters decide?
That makes sense.
It is a good inquiry, though, and
Yeah.
it would take us backwards, but it was.
It would
one of-
definitely take us backwards, and I didn't want to go there
No, it's
necessarily,
fine.
but I just wanted to make sure I asked the
But
question.
I think I'd like to flag that it was listed as one of the possible scenarios for us.
Right.
And we ruled it out early on because we felt like 4 boards is not that much better than 7 boards.
But I think we thought at that time
Mm-hmm.
that if the other school voted against it, they could potentially be merged into the whatever it's called.
Mm-hmm.
But now we find out that they can't. And I
Under,
think they've
under
got-
current law.
Under the current law.
Right. So we don't know what the state
Right.
might plan when they see how many districts are still left
Yeah.
out there.
Gotcha, okay.
That's really, the open question is, what is the landscape going to look like in 2019 after all the large, most of the large mergers have occurred already.
Okay.
I forget the number, but it's like 60% of the students in the state now are in a merged district. So, what's left over, and geographically, what does that look like? There's unique geographic situations, and there's places that people just haven't been able to find a path forward. So I don't, it's hard to predict what the state would do.
So what does it mean for the elementary district? Because we have Bennington, which is a K through 5, and Shasbury is a K through 6.
Right.
And how is that going to change if you end up with the elementary district?
Just think about it like North Bennington as a prototype. North Bennington is a non-operating district K through 6, but is a member of Mount Anthony under this MUD configuration, grades 7 through 12. If Shaftesbury were to vote against the merger, Shaftesbury would be still a member of the modified union, just like North Bennington, but wouldn't be allowed to vote on the elementary issues.
Yeah.
But would operate schools K through 6.
Yeah.
So they would have their own separate board, though?
They'd have their own separate board.
For now.
And you'd also have representatives on the Unified Union Board
That can't vote?
that can't vote on elementary issues, or should say, they should recuse themselves from voting.
So
So
what, so
what
they
does
can only
that
vote
mean?
on half the budget then?
Right, right. Yeah.
What does that mean for the rest of the communities with regard to the tax incentives? I mean, I would presume, like, using Shaftesbury as an example,
Yeah.
that takes the tax incentives out of the picture for Shaftesbury.
That's
but
correct.
does that leave the rest of the incentives in for the rest of the communities? And
Yeah, so
they shifted?
the difference would be, you remember, the merger creates a single school district with a single tax rate, so that new tax rate would be looking a little different than the model we created that included everyone.
Okay.
But once that tax rate's created, the communities that are part of it get the 8 cents, 6, 4, and 2. The communities that don't join don't have that merged tax rate, and they don't get any incentives.
So I've been doing a lousy job of working John in here, and then we'll do Cindy afterwards, so.
What happens with CDC amongst all this stuff?
They're not involved in this right now.
Yeah,
at
they're
this time.
actually exempt under the law from, the career centers are exempt from the Act 46
Yeah,
process.
The 3 independent career centers in the state have been left out of this law.
Right, because you're going to have voter approval to bring them back in, because voter approval is the one that made the CDC.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
and I don't
So it's
think
going to
this-
go back to the voter, it has nothing to
Yeah.
do with any committee.
That's right. So the legislature just said, don't even, we're not putting them on our list of things that need to change. That's something for the future, and not all, as you know, not all career centers are configured the same way. Some are part of their school districts, like Burlington, for example, or
Okay.
Essex. Others are standalone school districts.
Cindy?
Okay, I don't mean to throw a rock in the stream.
Yeah, you
but-
do.
Okay, I do. All right, and I guess I appreciate the fact that you're going out of your way to help North Bennington. My thought is, you're not going out of your way to help any of the other outlining districts. I don't feel comfortable even warning this, and I think, personally, I think it should be an alternative. That's the way I think it should go. Because again, it's hard to explain to the people of Pownell, and I've talked to several people, and the look I got was, good thing I don't have sidewalks, so they've been throwing me off the sidewalk. When they find out you are going to be responsible for that $4 million that Bennington has to take care of their schools.
So,
I don't-
can I say
I think
something
we're
about
rushing it,
the
yes.
4 million? If you're-
And as far as the, not to
Yeah.
shut you off, but the incentives, it's nothing. At the end of the 4 years, that bond is going to still be there. And what little bit you're giving the people, you're going to be doubling at the end of the 4 years. It's in here too. Number one, you're not
It's
going to
not-
save
it's
money.
not a- it is-
You're
it's
not
right.
going to save money.
You save,
And you
Powell
got-
saves money right off without the incentive,
Regardless
just
of the
because it does. The math is.
For what, 4 years?
No, just forget the incentives, just the fact that you are now participating in a larger district that has a better efficiency and greater economy of scale, your tax rate drops.
And number one, we've already been 80% of what the state wanted us to do. That's very close. And it would not take much to convince them.
So one thing we should remember about the bond, we keep hearing about it. It's a performance bond, which means the bond payments are supposed to be covered by the savings in energy. So one could argue that that money was going to be spent no matter what. It's either going towards a bond payment that improves the schools and makes them efficient down the road, or you would have been paying it in higher utility bills, which you would have absorbed. So the
Not
bond
us,
payments are
Bennington.
covered by the savings.
Bennington,
in-
not us.
No, but if Bennington did
And I'm happy for
not
that.
do the bond, their budget and tax rate would in all probability be the same because you would have the higher utility bills. So they're going to have lower utility bills because of the efficiencies they put in it, and because it's a performance contract, what they save in utility bills covers the bond payment. So even if they didn't do the bond, it would be the same amount of money. And I don't know if that helps, but.
Yeah,
I think,
understand.
these are great questions, and these are questions, what you're doing as a committee is saying, okay, we took our best shot at it, now the voters get to decide that. And if you're an advisable district, your school board gets to decide whether you even want to hold the vote or not. That's the process. It's not really what this committee doesn't get to compel Pownell to do that vote, just like at North Bennington. So, from my perspective, we've had a pretty interesting couple of weeks, and we've explored some of the gray areas around this process. So most of that was around the issue of advisable and necessary pertaining to North Bennington. We've got some clarity from the district's legal counsel. We got some clarity from the state's legal people. So we kind of understand that now. And the idea that, if North Bennington decides not to hold a vote, the rest of you can still move forward. That's kind of a revelation, and it was kind of confusing between the two, the older law and the new law, and how they came together. But process-wise, where we're at is pretty much the same process. We're in the process of submitting the articles to the state for approval. That still hasn't happened yet, so we're in the drafting phase still. This issue in North Bennington was the bigger issue at the moment, but we learned a lot about that. But ultimately, the committee's work at some point is going to transition to, educating people about what are the pros and cons of doing this, and there are pros and cons. So I think, when I hear, and Jim, we come to a sort of a defense of it, but it's pretty clear there's pros and cons of doing this merger. Any merger, there's pros and cons, and it's not fair to talk about the cons without talking about the pros. But it's ultimately, take it off your shoulders. It's something the voters get to decide, if you throw it their way. And, from my perspective, I think, the context is one where you have to think about what is the state going to force you to do? Are incentives important or not? And is it a better way to operate your district? There's stuff in the report that talks about these things as being pros. But process-wise, I think what we explored in the last couple of weeks was, this idea that what would happen if North Bennington didn't hold a vote. And we looked at that as maybe an alternative approach with something to do with Mount Anthony, but it wasn't like throwing them a bone per se. We were just trying to explore that legally, and we found out that, based on the newer law, we don't need to worry about them holding a vote or not. The MUD can still exist without their participation. Process-wise, though, we're still on track to figure this out. But I mean, that's sort of put to bed, and then so I guess the thinking would be why explore an option that had a vote mechanism that allowed North Bennington to leave Mount Anthony. That's really doesn't even make sense politically anymore, because you still can proceed with your MUD, and I think that's the clearest thing for the voters to pursue at this point.
So just to clarify, North Bennington's hold a vote, everybody else votes, and everything improves on that end.
In accordance with your articles,
According to the
if
article.
three of you vote, yeah.
All the North Bennington K through 12 kids would end up at MAU.
K through 12, no. they would be part of the MUD, they would have choice K through 6 like they
So
currently do.
What would that do for Shasberry? Because we have District 1, District 2.
Yeah,
How
but-
does that divide?
You have to think about districts, not towns. So those residents of Shasberry, that,
It goes back to the MAU article, which was, one was District 1 approved, one was it
Yeah.
before MAU or after?
those residents of Shasberry that have choice K through 6 are voters of the North Bennington School District. They're not voters of the Shasberry Town School District. So nothing, they're going to vote as part of the North
So
Bennington.
actually,
vote.
if North Bennington is nothing, all their kids get school choice.
They maintain what they currently have,
Retain, so they end up at MAU.
7 through 12, that's correct.
Okay, so K
Yeah.
through 6, they have school choice, 7 through 12.
Nothing
they
changes
have
for
MAU.
them.
Okay.
Nothing changes for them.
And what's it mean for them at the table? For MAU, they get one vote or no votes?
It's based, I think you had 4, 2, 2, and 1,
Yeah.
2, 2, 2, and 1. So they would have 2.
So two.
But the way the MUD is set up, that language, and this is how other MUDs have gone in the state,
Yeah.
they are essentially required to recuse themselves from discussing any issue at that board that pertains to elementary operations, since they don't.
Just wanted to make sure we have.
It's, the MUD isn't the best.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to understand, but that's the way we figured out to let, districts come together and not all of them participate.
I just want people getting the false representation that North Bennington is nothing. They could potentially have a choice for 7 through 12.
Yeah, I mean, the state's been pretty clear about that. The only way that can happen is for them to be let out of the Mount Anthony School District.
Okay.
Dan, so we know that North Bennington doesn't have to warn the vote.
None of the advisable districts do.
What?
None of the advisable.
None of the advisable did, that was,
Yeah, so that's sort of where the conflict came up with this legal issue, is like, we have the old laws, I told you 706 goes back to the 50s and 60s. This idea of advisable versus necessary. And 706 is pretty clear, it says, if you're an advisable district, then the school board does not have to warn that vote. The school board could be petitioned to warn the vote, but the school board has the option not to warn the vote. And by definition, any district that's not a member of this committee could be listed as advisable to the committee. They don't have to be a member, but that school board has the option. But the other part of the law, the newer part of the law, the merger law, doesn't necessarily force an advisable district to merge or to vote. What it says, however, in the case of a modified unified school district, is that all the members, Act 156 says, all the districts that are members of the current union district have to vote in order for incentives to be provided to form a MUD, So the question was, does the old law, how does that intersect with the new law? And basically the idea, your district's lawyer making a really cool argument, and I can't begin to paraphrase it, but basically he said, that doesn't make any sense on the surface. If the legislature, when they passed the new law, understood that boards would have the authority to vote yes or no, then they knew that when they passed Act 156. So we shouldn't read too strictly the idea that all should vote, because by definition, those that are advisable have this underlying authority to decide whether they want to vote or not.
But if they don't warn the vote and they're advisable, they're not eligible for incentives.
That's correct. They can't merge if they don't vote.
and we would have to get the 3.
You have to have 3.
We would need 3 school districts to warn the vote and then pass the vote.
That's correct. Yeah, only the districts that merge get the incentives.
It's done.
Yeah.
Nobody votes and it's done.
Huh?
Nobody warns, if all the school districts decide not to warn the vote, right, this is dead.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the idea would be that, I would hope people would warn the vote, so at least give the voters a chance to express their opinion, even if that strong opinion is no. And that's useful in itself. I mean, we've seen that around the state where, you warn the vote and, it's overwhelmingly opposed in some communities, but, to stop it without warning it, I don't know. But that's something for locally, you have to decide what you want to do.
So, sticking tightly to the agenda as we have tonight, not so much. Dan, would you want to, is there anything else about the North Bennington stuff that I omitted, or would you want to just sort of move into the next phase, which is basically our options going forward?
I mean, I would just come back to, for me, it's all about the process and helping you go through the process. So I don't see the conversation the last 2 weeks anything but informative to what the process is. It's a complex process, and it's helpful to know where your neighbors are in these things and to surface questions. But Donald and I have been talking a lot about this issue. It's like some of this isn't on the committee's shoulders. Your job is to sort of frame this out the best you can. You've done your due diligence, and the next step is to bring it to the voters and let them decide. And that means not having, your role is not to sell this to the voters, it's to discuss it, inform it, pros and cons, so issues, are the taxes going up or down, or are the incentives causing taxes up or down, or what's up with the debt, all these things should be exposed to the voters so they can make an informed decision. We still, on process though, the next milestone is to get approval from the State Board of Education. Currently, we're on track to do that for the third week of September. But we still, we've been spending a lot of time working on this one issue of Act 156 or 706 relative to the necessary versus advisable. But we still need to get feedback from the AOE and our attorney on specific aspects of the articles. I expect to get that next week. So assuming everything's on track, the next step this will go to the State Board of Education for a vote, up or down vote on their part. And once we receive approval from them, then the next step is to move forward with the vote. In between next week and then, we have to think about community engagement and what's going to be necessary to educate people about the process.
And that's, Cindy, where we really get to your point, I think, is that I agree that we don't want to sell anything. We're not trying to hawk this.
Explain is all you got to do.
But if we say it a little bit like, this merger proposal makes it less likely for the small schools to go away, because we've built in some extra protections. This merger proposal in some communities, like Pownell, reduces the tax even before the incentives and after the incentives.
Tax rate.
The tax rate, yeah.
Nothing to do with taxes.
The tax rate. If we say, this proposal promotes inter-district choice, we can point to that as something. If we talk about the other efficiencies that would be received by this proposal, there are a number of things that people may not realize. And the big one, really, for the small outlying communities is what proportion of votes do you get in the final board? We're going to be merged anyway. So, arguably, what we're setting up right now is not proportional, but it feels fair. And that's a difficult thing to sell, but I do think that's important to Pownell, because
It's very important.
if you don't have those two votes, you're likely to have many fewer, if we went to a purely proportional model. So I don't want to get into arguing for or against this, but I do feel like there are, contrary to what somebody said at the last meeting, there are a lot of things baked into this proposal that are better for many of our communities. Not all of them, but there are a lot of them that are better. They're just subtle, and they require some nuance. And so it's going to be difficult for us to push out the positive side of that without feeling like we're trying to sell somebody a bill of goods. There is also a negative side of it.
If you can do a balance, pros and cons of it, for
Yeah.
sure. But so the issue of, one issue in all this conversation that was identified was this issue of, we think you might need to postpone your vote a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we did want to talk with you tonight a bit.
Yeah, and so let's talk that. So, well, before we leave North Bennington entirely, are people happy with the approach that I've more or less put forward, which is rather than getting into removing them from the MAU and rather than going through a lot of contortions of rewriting the merger proposal, that we simply move forward with what we've written and that we not expect them to vote? And I don't know if we need to change any language in that proposal to reflect that, Dan, or to reflect the AOE's decision, but...
I think what I wait to do is to wait till I get concrete feedback from them on the specifics of the articles, and I read the whole thing again to make sure there's nothing that we're missing in terms of narrative. I don't think so at this point, because we talked in the report about the unlikely, a possibility of them approving this. But it's a good question. I think we can go back and take a look at it.
North Bennington's preference would be to not be listed in the report at all. But as I understood it, because we're gunning for an MUUSD,
I believe they're going to have to be listed.
they'd be listed even if they don't vote.
That gets into then the next step of applying what we've learned.
Mhm.
And that'll, I think to move the process along is really wait, if we present, and we have presented the information to Donna at the AOE, who's the one who scrutinizes the format of this, she might say, okay, take them out or put them in, or how, it becomes very mechanical at that point. It's not necessarily like an intellectual conversation. It's like, how does she want it set up for the state board to consider? It's not going to change the structure of what we're talking about. It's just how they want to see it presented.
So I don't know if we need to vote on this, but do people feel happy with moving forward with what we have?
I think you have to move forward.
Yes, I agree. It hasn't changed anything. We've had all this discussion.
Right.
We knew North Bennington wasn't going to vote
And-
for it. Let's just keep going.
Well, if we wanted to get really radical, we could, if North Bennington was let out of Mount Anthony, we could be shooting for a single SU, a single district union that oversaw everything, and North Bennington would just go do something else. But
And there's no guarantee that would happen. That's the problem.
There's no guarantee that would
Because the
happen.
state might say the best place for them is still here.
Right.
Then not having a U, that opens a can of worms, because there's a small group in Shasbury there, out of MAU too, and they've been vocal, they're a little vocal about it.
Mhm.
So if you let one out, the next question is, who's the next one to go?
Yeah.
Once you open the door,
Yeah.
it's open.
So let's just let North Bennington do their thing. They've got a program, they're not standing in our way, they're being helpful if anything,
I
and.
think we respect North Bennington, with their independence with the K through 6.
Yep.
I think we should respect that.
Yep.
And if it means moving forward by not allowing them to vote, we can do that. If it comes to MAU, then we have to come back to the table.
Mhm.
And I think that's the next thing.
Take it as it comes.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so decision on that made, merge, so then the vote issue that Dan brought up, I spoke to Cassie, our town clerk. Dan dragged me in there and said, you gotta talk to Cassie because she's freaking out. So I guess the town clerks there are a lot of issues about how do directors get their petition, to whom do the directors bring their petitions? Because there is no clerk for the district that we would be
I
forming.
thought Steve Stitzel answered that for us.
He did, we know the answer now,
Yeah.
but there have been questions like this from town clerks, what's the
Yeah.
date gonna be, what are the mechanics of it? So a number of questions have come up, and I think the answer is that if we decide tonight that we are going to move forward with this, that Steve Stitzel has a letter that explains all of this, that would go to all the town clerks, and then the suggestion was that we actually convene a meeting of the town clerks and have a chance for them to ask questions and talk through. Not everybody from the committee has to come, but that maybe at least Dan and I and Jim get together and, with the town clerks and explain what the process would be so that they don't feel left out in the dark. But I guess the issue is one of when do we hold the vote, right? So October 10th feels kind of soon.
Yeah, we've got all these things. I mean, when you start thinking about October 10th, it just puts a lot of pressure on the situation in terms of getting petitions and so forth, and increases the potential that something gets screwed up. And it gives more people, it gives the school boards more time to digest it, just if we back off a little bit. So on the other hand, one of the reasons we chose October 10th was to give plenty of time for a vote for reconsideration if there was a need to be one. So within 30 days, the community could be petitioned to have a reconsideration vote. We talked about that a little bit with Steve, the attorney. The objective would be to, once again, this whole thing is about taking the shot at the incentives. And you can say to the voters, you tried. In order for the incentives to be enacted, the voters have to vote prior to November 30th. As long as the voters vote affirmatively prior to November 30th, it would meet the conditions of Act 46 and Act 49. If a petition was presented to overturn a positive vote and turn it into a negative vote, it still would have since the original affirmative vote happened prior to November 30th, it'd be all set. On the other hand, if a vote was no, and you wanted to turn it into a positive vote, you wouldn't have the opportunity to get the incentives, because that would mean the positive vote would happen after November.
I'll guarantee you that if you vote no the first time and yes the second time, you will get the incentive.
Yeah.
If you don't get the incentive, I know an awful lot of people up in Montpelier that won't be going back. Okay?
Yeah,
I'll
I think
guarantee
it's,
you.
that's, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But what we're hearing right now is that if the yes vote happens after November 30th, and one of the reasons we pushed the vote up to October 10th is it would leave plenty of room for that yes vote to happen prior to November 30th. If we push it back to later October, early November, possibility in that scenario would be that that community that votes yes after the date, as much as they voted yes, would not be getting any incentives. So I think, honestly, I think we do need to push it back a little bit because there's just too much going on.
Well, and it's part of why we picked October 10th. We were trying
There's
to get,
another vote going on.
we were trying to get North Bennington
Yeah.
to vote, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
were saying there's a lot of expense involved
Yeah.
in that. We said, you're gonna have a sewer bond vote anyway that day, so why not double up and do the
Yeah.
Act 46? But now they're not in the vote, so it's really just Bennington. And
Well,
Cassie
would
said,
prefer to have it on another.
Cassie said she'd prefer to have it on another day.
Well, there you go.
because they can.
Some
they-
school board members would too, because you'd get people that are just interested in
Yeah.
that vote
Right.
and not the bond.
Well, that's a good idea, yeah. Well, but Cassie's point of view also was that if you're just in there for the sewer bond, they can hand count it. You know, they don't have to get all the machines out and do all that kind of stuff, but if you've got
But they
potential
have to get
directors in
machines
there.
if you're gonna put the new board in.
That's right, so you gotta have the machines, so she said it didn't make any difference and she'd rather have it, so Bennington would prefer to have it later than October 10th. And I guess the question for the board is, it sounds like it's going to be, for the most part, a one-shot deal if we move it after October 30th. We get, our communities get one shot, and then if we vote on it again, we put John in charge of legislative outreach.
No, but I'll guarantee you, the state will buckle.
So, how are people feeling
About a date.
Pick a date.
about a date?
Pick a date.
Why don't we can we leave it open to the clerks to get together and set a date?
Yeah, I
rather
was
than
going to
us tell them
suggest just
what
like
day?
have us, Donald, Jim, and I work with the clerks to find a date. We have to get their input on it, but, it would be hard for the committee to pick a date, but just, are you okay with us pushing it back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
That was the-
Cindy, how's 2025?
If this goes through, I'm gonna move out of town at the end of 4 years, because it really scares me that they're gonna start closing schools.
You can't, though.
After 4 years, don't tell me they can't. They'll do it.
Well, we've got
5
5.
There's 5 and then
And you have
2
to have
years after.
supermajority.
Right.
So it really would be 7 years?
It'd be 7 years.
There's
and it would-
7 altogether.
So that's 7 years.
And remember that
You're
we,
retired by then.
but remember that we did, the part of the committee, the part of the priorities was to protect our surrounding small schools. And so we baked into our proposal a much more difficult voting process than the state would if they came down and did it to close a school. So we've done a lot. Baked into this proposal are a lot of protections for the small surrounding schools. And those are the things that we have to daylight a little bit, because they're very subtle, but important.
And important, yeah.
Yeah. So.
For the smaller schools.
All right, so do we need a motion on that, do you think? Or is everybody happy just to have us go work with the town clerks?
I'll make a motion that someone from the board and the superintendent, meeting with the town clerk and pick a date.
Second that.
Okay, any discussion on that? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. So Dan and Jim and I will contact the town clerks almost immediately, and
Yeah.
as soon as we, warn your town clerks. I got a call from Ryan last night, so he's not a town clerk, but,
Speaking of process, so then we set the date, right? But we still don't have from Steve what the ballot article would look like.
Yeah, so I mean, the first step is we need to get a date, because that date has to go into the draft articles.
Well, that's up to the state anyway. I mean, they have to approve first.
Yeah, but in order for them to approve, we have to draft it, and that's one of the items it's mandatory in the law, so we have to have a date of the vote. And then, once we get the articles firmed up, Steve, from that, can produce a ballot. But that's like a matter, I would say, within the next 2 weeks,
Yeah.
because that gets packaged up for the State Board of Education. The AOE has to write a legal opinion
And-
on the articles.
And is there anything that in the articles that need to be altered based on what we've learned about North Bennington's
I
position?
think that was Donald's question. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I haven't read them in a week or
Yeah,
so,
I haven't-
and we have a
yeah.
lot of correspondence since then. And I think
Yeah.
the nice thing about, once again, of having had this conversation, it's fresh in the both minds of Steve and Donna, who look at a lot of these proposals, but now you're on their radar. And they know the lens through which this needs to be evaluated. So I think if we can get timely feedback from them next week, we'll be in good shape.
I do have to make a brief, I guess I would say, send a little bit of thanks up to Montpelier, to Donna, who, I'll send you this email, but she put a lot of work into it. And essentially what she came up with was, this is a very special case. It's the MUUSD legislation's expiring in the end of November.
Unlikely it'll happen again.
It's unlikely it'll happen anywhere else in the state. And so this is a sort of they essentially are saying, we empathize with what you're going through, and we think a reasonable interpretation of the law would allow you to take that vote. So it was I thought, very reasonable, difficult, but very reasonable interpretation, and they were really stretching to try to let us
To the nuances of it?
to the nuance to try to let us to take a vote. Anyway, so, yeah, so I'll send that around, and, but good luck getting through it. It's quite a tome.
Are we going to have forums to inform our taxpayers?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the next scope of the work, is that we need to figure that out. That's typically what committees do next is, once this part is done, and this last week and a half or so has sort of been it's an important conversation, but it hasn't really changed the process. But the next part, once we get the final documents to the state, they've looked at the draft, we haven't revised that. I'm hoping that'll happen in the next 10 days at the latest. The next step, what the committee needs to start thinking about is, what are the communities going to need in terms of information, what processes, community forums, and so forth to educate people. Every region has its own communication outlets and its own needs, so we need to have that conversation with your school boards.
We should calendar some of this. I mean, it seems to me like the next, I know you're doing a great job getting the schools open, but in 2 days, let's talk to the town clerks. I mean, we got to get the town clerks on board as quickly as possible, right?
Yeah.
We really got to get that.
We need the
I have
date
time
to
tomorrow
make
if you
that.
do.
Okay, so tomorrow we'll work on that.
Okay.
Then we have a little bit of time while Steve drafts the, he can be kind of drafting the
Yeah, we need to
ballot.
get, they have, the first step is to revise the articles. The ballot really comes from the articles.
Okay.
So we haven't heard the technical feedback yet from Steve or Donna on the articles.
Okay, nothing the committee can do on
No,
that. That's all on you.
and it's just wordsmithing and then we look at it if it's a major change. I don't anticipate major changes, but you never know what they're gonna think about it. So we need to do that revision. And then once that's done, because remember, Article 10 is essentially the ballot.
Yeah.
Okay, so once the articles are stable from the state's perspective, Donna takes them and starts producing her thing for the state board. Steve takes them and can produce the documents and actually can produce the ballots and so forth. But
Yeah.
until the articles themselves and the report are solid, we can't really produce the ballot.
But so that's on you and me. We'll get that done.
Yep.
Committee doesn't have to do anything about that, but it does feel like, Cindy, we probably should begin to figure out how we
Informational night.
talk about information to different communities.
So we should set a date for when we talk about that.
We should set another meeting of this
Yeah, set
committee.
it
Well, this committee could meet again.
Right.
And develop a plan for that. I think we don't want to let it go too long, because ideally, I would, in my ideal world, we'd set up some sort of informational session in each community that maybe somebody from each town would come to it. We might rotate. We might all just do one town, but it would be some other town. So that when you're speaking to Shaftesbury, it's not just Aaron talking to whoever's there, it's Aaron and people from other communities, so that we push out this idea that this is a group of people that's trying to work something out for the community. So I don't know, that would require some scheduling and a little bit of effort, but it feels to me like it might be a good way to describe what we're trying to do in the different communities.
I would suggest that we just put that on an agenda for the next meeting, so that we all can be thinking about it ahead of time, rather than try to work that out tonight.
Okay.
That's my suggestion.
Yeah, that's fine. I just don't want to let it go too long.
No, I mean, if we have to meet
So
next
let's
week,
set
amend
one-
it.
We need the vote date and work back from that.
Yeah.
We need the vote date, we'll work back from that. There's a lot of misinformation out there. It'd be nice to start pecking away at that.
I think we should try and get that going for next week. I don't,
Well, we certainly might have a vote date by next week, right? So then we,
Yeah, we're gonna need to have a vote date by
Yeah.
next week, so we
Yeah.
can finish
So
the
we'll get
articles.
together next week.
Should we set a meeting date for next
Yeah,
meeting?
we should.
Can we?
yeah.
You guys are gluttons for punishment. I love it. I love this committee.
I will
We've
say,
come this far.
you don't necessarily need me, I'm happy to be here,
Oh, we
but
need
I
you.
teach on Monday and Wednesday nights.
So Monday is Veterans,
Yeah.
Labor Day.
What
Yeah.
about the 7th, which is...
7th is open.
Thursday it has been our sort of...
Yeah, Wednesday night you have
Good day.
BSD, so stay away from
Does Thursday
Wednesday.
work for people?
Thursday the 7th? Who cannot come Thursday the 7th?
It's at 6 PM.
Oh, that was too easy.
Six?
Thursday the 7th at 6 o'clock.
Yep, assume it's here, but I got to confirm tomorrow that this is available. This location is available.
And so, I think the only agenda item on that meeting will be discussing, whether we do it, Cindy, you and I talked about doing an FAQ sheet, a sort of frequently asked questions sheet, or some other piece that you could hand to people that would say, it's difficult, but here's the summary of what's going on.
And it's got to be very explained explicitly.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
difficult.
so we could take all that up.
maybe we
next
could
week.
all come to that meeting with specific questions that we know are relevant to our community, so that we can just make sure that those are all addressed, we can address them.
Yeah, and maybe spend part of the week thinking about what would your community like in terms of what would be a good communication.
Oh, you don't want to hear about it.
Could we possibly make it earlier than 6?
We could possibly make it earlier.
Not at all, any earlier?
I
Oh, come on, sorry. It's in Rutland. I know, what a toss-up.
No, that's
Can you-
fine.
Can you live with
Probably-
6?
I can live with 6, but I'll probably have to leave by 7 to pick up my daughter from dance class.
Let's make it a really concise meeting. Let's,
Look, we're going to be an hour tonight,
Yeah.
so.
yeah.
6 to 7 works.
Dan?
I mean,
So Danny, for other mergers, you've put together FAQs.
Yeah, I
and stuff,
usually-
so-
it's
So
something I
maybe
do.
you can,
Yeah,
maybe even send us some examples of what other communities
I
have
can
done.
start drafting some for
Yeah.
you. And
So it's
just-
good to have
just-
something to work with.
Yeah, just
It is
based
so
on what's in the
nice.
report,
Something
you
to
know,
chew
what are
on,
the
yeah.
major issues? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That would just be helpful for us.
Not sure I'll have it for this Thursday, but I might. I think it's a priority to get the articles done.
Oh, I
So,
agree.
yeah.
But it might be something you've done before. not-
Yeah,
not
yeah, no,
necessarily
it is.
Specific to
There's
us.
there's a lot online that we can look
Yeah,
to from
okay,
the
yeah.
ones that have gone
That would be
ahead of
another
us,
thing, just to
yeah.
send us what other communities
Yeah,
have
we don't
done.
need to have a specific one for us yet, but just something.
Yeah.
The
And then,
communities that voted it down, would be interesting to see what they ask.
yeah, and they're
Pros and
usually,
cons.
when I draft them, the committees use them as a template, then add and, figure stuff out, because usually there's a couple hot button issues, and those require some discussion among the committee to come to an agreement on how to discuss it. Usually one side of the issue wants it to be portrayed one way versus the other, and, there's some argument about that, or contention.
The next week we'll have directions how to become directors as well. Is that the plan too?
Directions on how to become director?
Yes, so
Yeah.
people want to apply.
Petition process?
Petition process.
Yeah, I mean, if we can get the articles done with Steve, Steve is really good at the process end of it. I mean, that's his real strength as a municipal attorney, so he's done a number of these, and he can, yeah.
And Cassie offered to help with the other town clerks too, so, there's
I mean, I
just
think
on that
it's-
one issue, people will be getting ballots.
I think just to get it out to the community, so if they want to run, they
Yeah.
have rights to run.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, that's another
another
reason to
reason-
push the vote back a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Good reason not to do it on the 10th.
Yeah,
Right.
there wasn't really enough time to do all that.
Okay, well, we've been ambitious this summer. It was okay to pick an ambitious vote date, but we're going to back up a little bit and take time to do some
Well,
communicating
the
on
10th
this.
gives us, and again, what we learned recently, I think makes the 10th give a little bit more breathable room if we don't do it on the 10th, is that as long as the first positive vote happens before the 30th.
Right.
and, You know, so
Yeah.
that, we were under the impression that we had, before that we had them both votes before the 30th.
Right.
And which made it necessary to do it in October.
Anything else from the board? Any other, from the committee? Any other comments, questions, concerns for tonight? And everybody's on for next week. We have on the agenda public comment period. Is there anybody in the audience that's got a burning question that our experts could answer? Nelson, come on up and identify yourself, please, even though we know who you are and are very appreciative.
But we
for
want to
what
put you
do.
on camera.
Try to get his left side. That's his better side.
That's Nelson Brownell. Basically, I had a couple of questions to do with this. I can't make these Thursday night meetings, as you know, because I'm the chair of the select board of the town. That's our meeting, so you'll bear with me. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. One is that reading through this whole thing is you talk about classroom and school and staff reconfiguration. Can you explain to me what you mean by that once this new group is formed?
Yeah, there's a, if you don't mind,
Please do.
there's a paragraph in the report. I think the committee had me flesh out and make it more specific. But if you think right now, forget about the merger, if you will, just think about your current school district. Right now, your school board has authority over figuring out, how many teachers to have at each grade, whether there's multi-age classrooms or third and fourth grade combined. Any of those kinds of decisions under Vermont law reside with the school board. So once you merge the district, one school board is now going to have authority over those very same issues. But it's a new animal because you're going to be looking across towns. And it really, I think, resonated with the committee. Very similar to the small school sort of closure issue, is like we need some protections to ensure that school configurations aren't disrupted immediately because of the merger. In particular, I think one of the issues that was a concern was the turning a school from a K-6 school into a K-3 school, which theoretically the new school board would have the authority to do. So the idea was to ensure that wouldn't happen for a while, to provide some assurance through the merger. On the other side of that, however, the efficiency piece, what's driving a lot of Act 46, at some point, if enrollments are declining, someone needs to make a decision to bring a school down to a K-3 school instead of a K-6 school. And so you want to allow that to happen at some point in the future, but you don't want to create political concern immediately because of the merger. So I think the language the committee included, very similar to closing the school, ensured that the current grade configurations would stay the same for a while.
That was actually about 6th and 7th grade.
6th and 7th.
Yeah. So it was about communities, there's been a lot of fracas about the 6th and 7th grade, and so it was about not having this change go through and then immediately telling communities that didn't want to use the Mount Anthony Middle School that they had to use it. So some protections about that.
And it was about grandfathering students too, so students wouldn't be disrupted. So they wanted, the committee wanted to ensure that students where they are now would continue to enjoy that and wouldn't be expecting to move.
Okay. But in the future, it sounds like you can be more efficient by actually doing some of the things that you talk about. If these schools only have 3 kids in kindergarten, why would you have 3 different teachers out there when you can combine them in one school?
That's right.
And move a teacher there?
Right.
Versus,
So the new board will have greater authority to do that there will be fewer barriers to doing that because the teachers would all be employees of one school district. No doubt the teachers union would be interested in negotiating some language around being reassigned. But yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that's appropriate, and that's usually what happens. But the upside of it is, that's ultimately a way to protect jobs too. It's hard to attract people to teach .2 positions here and there all the time. So if you can combine those things and create full-time positions, those positions tend to be more attractive and more stable. But at some point, if the broader demographic trend continues and the number of students in the state declines, then the school board needs to have the authority to make those decisions. And that's the theory of action behind Act 46.
would it initially allow people to have school choice to move kids to different schools? I remember it was Powell had one that was on the border, but it was in Bennington.
Yeah.
And they wanted to go to Powell, but they couldn't.
Right.
Would would this allow that?
Yeah, we have some
Yes.
language in there. It's something really, the committee can't, I'm sorry if I keep answering, you guys feel to jump in.
No, you're doing great, Dan. Jim and I are
The
loving it.
committee can't really prescribe that. That's, once again, something that's in the purview of the school board's authority. So the new school board, the committee in its report is basically saying to the school board, we encourage you to look at this. We think it would be a really good thing. Try to come up with a way to allow for some sort of lottery or some way to have elementary school choice among the schools operated by the district. I think that would, the narrative says something that would be good for kids and it's good for the region.
Okay, and the other one, was I agree with what was said earlier, I don't know who said it first, but one of the things I wrote was suggesting that this group, or a small committee of this group, would go to each town and explain this. Because one thing is having a fact sheet where you question answers, but it's really a difference when you stand up here and you ask a question and you get an answer. Because then you could, you feed a little more on that, what that question or answer was, so that you can get it more fine-tuned.
It would also give us an opportunity to let people know that it has been a very nuanced and sort of difficult process. It's not an easy thing to find your way through, and so the kind of human factor, we're just a bunch of people that are trying to do the best we can with this law.
And the other one is, I know Cindy always keeps hollering about paying down people's bonds, but the other one is funds that schools have now where they've collected up, and I know there's a thing in here that allows them to do something, but those funds all get transferred to, unless, for this one school board, unless they do something with it in a set period of time.
Right.
Correct.
That's right.
So,
Yeah, there's a transition period, and there's also the potential, there's the potential to divert the asset prior to the actual go-live date. The law basically says on the go-live date, any assets or liabilities are property of the new district. So in between now and then, you have an opportunity to divert your assets. You can't really divert your liabilities. But the other thing that can happen, and a lot of districts do this, if you, for instance, a common scenario would be if you had a reserve fund that was set aside to repair the Pownell School, a similar reserve fund, similarly directed, could be created under the new school district. So the new unified school district could have a reserve fund to repair the Pownell School only. And you can. So districts kind of do a combination of those two things. Usually, the things that get diverted are real estate that isn't really germane to the operation of the district. There was a school district, for instance, that owned a cemetery. That really, there wasn't any need to transfer that to the new merged district.
That's what it did.
But reserve funds, your reserve funds sometimes are incorporated in the new district, or they're drawn down, to a place where they're a reasonable amount or something like that. But
well, the school board in our area actually owns our little league field.
right.
Yes, it does,
So we might
yeah.
wanna-
Yeah, so those kinds of things you really want to think about,
The other thing is, and I assume it's the same for the school, when funds are created, they're created by a vote of the community,
That's correct.
and they can't be spent for anything but those funds unless you have another vote of the community. Is there enough timetable for this to happen? Because I haven't looked at that.
Yeah, so during this year of transition, that's when these things happen. So the new school board would come into being, let's assume the voters vote in early November and create the school district. 60 days, within 60 days, the Secretary of Education would come down and organize the new school district, would be the first annual meeting, essentially, organizational meeting. And at that point, the new school board members become school board members of the new school district. And they don't, at this point, operate anything. They're just a board that's sort of a non-operating school board at this point. And they have this job of now creating policies and figuring out reserve funds, what they're going to propose to their new electorate in terms of reserve funds. So during the year of transition, those are the kinds of things the new school board would be thinking about, is how to create the reserve funds. But we've seen school boards create reserve funds that the voters give the school board authority to draw down those funds without further voter approval. So you can set up a reserve fund at the very beginning that gives the board the authority. The voters can basically delegate that authority to the board, to transfer surpluses or whatever. So it depends how they're set up.
Sure, they put it in a capital fund, which then lets you decide.
Yeah, Yeah,
you...
but the voters control that the whole way. The voters could revoke that authority at some point as well.
Which they can.
Yes, in half.
Okay, well, thank you. I won't ask any more now, but when I see you at the board meeting somewhere, I'll probably have some more.
Great. We'll look forward to that.
Thank you.
Other comments from the audience tonight? No? All right, well, we have a next meeting date. I guess I would be open to a motion to
Motion we
adjourn.
adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Right, have a good evening. Thank you, Mike.